Hi, welcome to Wheat Fest 2021. I'm Ding Jie, founder and food consultant at Star Culture. For those participating in Wheat Fest program for the first time, the Wheat Fest is National Library Board's signature event to encourage Singaporeans to be acquainted or reacquainted with reading in English and the mother tongue languages. Held annually and part of the national reading movement, the festival features Singapore and international writing of different genres, celebrating reading with over 60 author talks, panel sessions, workshops, and reading trails. With the theme of Reboot this year, let us take a moment to discover and refresh our lenses on ubiquitous aspects of life today, from how we approach nature, creativity, identity, technology, and even the nurturing activity of cookery. Through Star Culture, I've been championing fermentation knowledge, food science, and culinary innovation over the past years in Singapore. We want to create novel food products, diversify current sources of protein and nutrition, as well as to upcycle food waste. Currently, I collaborate with F&B establishments such as Restaurant Labyrinth, Gibson Bar, Salt and Hung, and local agencies to promote similar knowledge. Star Culture was founded to share this information and to educate consumers, producers alike, on the art, science, and history of fermentation. We want to reshape the conversation on food sustainability, as well as to deepen the appreciation of food in the region. Today, we are live from Morsels with chef owner Petrina Loh. For those who are not familiar with Petrina, she is a former banker. Petrina graduated from the prestigious California Culinary Academy, which runs the Cordon Bleu program. She has accumulated a bag full of experiences from various Michelin-star restaurants, as well as from her very well-traveled experience through Asia and the world. Here at Morsels, she works with a variety of flavor profiles, experiments on fermentation, curing, aging, and she possesses a good knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine. This evening's topic is cultured flavors and fermentation. We will cover the hows and whys of lacto-fermentation in this dialogue, and share some tips on fermentation techniques as well. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Hi, Petrina.
Hi, DJ.
So, would you tell us what it was like when you first started your cultures and what inspired you most during your fermentation journey?
Actually, now when I look back, I think it's been quite a while. I think I first got in touch with fermentation actually very young. I ate kimchi at a very young age. But then I only started making it maybe at like 17. Like, I mean, when I started eating, I didn't know it was fermented, right? I just thought it's like, oh, very nice tasting, like cabbage, sour. I like sour a lot. But then when I was doing my college in San Francisco, when I was 17, I was like introduced to it by a couple of Koreans. There are a lot of Koreans living in San Francisco. And and then I just started meddling with it.
Oh, wow. And today you're running a restaurant and you ferment your own kimchi. I understand you also make miso as well.
Yeah, so I think my first influence was when I started cooking professionally. I worked in this restaurant called State Bird Provisions in San Francisco. And Chef Stewart, basically there were a lot of ferments over there, not just limited to kimchi, of course, but even different styles of kimchi. I mean, you can basically make kimchi of anything, right?
Yep.
Root vegetables and all that. And then they made a lot of different kind of misos as well, besides the miso that we're used to. Not just your traditional soybean miso. Like, we were making crazy things, like you have lentil miso, you have very, like, new age stuff. So I was very, very interested because I think you can do a lot. You can create a lot of flavor. And you can really understand produce, and different seasons actually produce different kind of tasting kind of produce. And each ferment differs depending on the base product, which is the produce, right? And I think it's great that it can extend the season as well. So you can actually eat that same, like, let's say rutabaga for like the whole year if you preserved it. Yeah, and you see how it evolves. So that really intrigued me. Yeah.
I don't know, I thought it was quite interesting because we have almost the same culinary inspiration. So my first ever ferment, and I still remember this quite vividly, was a red cabbage sauerkraut. So it was simple red cabbage, salt, water, and it was my first ferment, so I didn't really know what to expect out of it. But it came out smelling like black currants, like Ribena. So that was, I think, my first insight into the power of fermentation, right? So you can put in red cabbage, which is earthy, which is quite vegetal.
Yep.
Put in salt, and out comes black currants, out comes like berries and fruits.
Correct.
And that's all powered by microbes, that's all powered by fermentation. And I think it's sort of just, when, it's the rest is all history, right?
Yep.
I just started making kombuchas, kimchis, miso, and I think everyone who sort of dabbles in fermentation has that same experience. Like you have that first thing that just opens that black box and the Pandora's box, and you just get like sucked into it. But I think people also want to know about why they should care about fermentation, why they should do it. So I mean, to you, what are the benefits of lacto-fermentation? You spoke a bit about preserving food throughout the seasons. Over here at the restaurant, what's your ethos and motivation?
Actually, what got me really started eating a lot of fermented goods is because over time I felt that, I had gastric for many years. Like maybe since as long as I can remember, like primary 3 or something. And I've always relied on medication. And through eating fermented goods, actually my gut is fine.
Wow.
And I realized how powerful it is just from the probiotics that come out of fermented vegetables. And I just slowly integrated it through all my diet, right? And I find that it's a very natural, I like natural healing. And I think that definitely is one of the drivers why we also introduced it to the restaurant, because it is very nourishing, it's great for your gut. Besides adding, the flavor and food preservation, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, you spoke, and I think some of your words that really resonated with me. You mentioned that you were chasing flavor, right? Chasing umami.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that? Like, what does that mean to you?
I mean, okay, so umami, six flavor, it's very talked about these days, very trendy. But also, it can be derived very naturally. I think the other thing that people are very familiar with, of course, is MSG, right? What actually is MSG is glutamate, right? And you can obtain it very naturally. It's occurring naturally in a lot of like fruits and vegetables that we come across in our day-to-day lives.
Kombu.
Yeah, kombu. I mean, mushrooms, tomatoes.
Yep.
And when you ferment that actually becomes very present. Without adding MSG, we say MSG, right? So for me, it's like we don't cook with MSG here, and I find it's a great way to introduce this umami, this tasty factor to like everything, whether it's sauces, whether it's a pickle on the side, and things like that.
Yeah, I think that is also why I look at fermentation from my startup culture. To me, it's a very powerful tool to create ingredients out of nowhere, right? High value ingredients, interesting flavors, combinations, using very simple, very naturally occurring produce, like vegetables, like microbes. So yeah, I think that is probably everything that is lacto-fermentation. We're also interested in the how. What is your methodology, perhaps your culinary inspiration? We want to look at the science of lacto-fermentation, what turns sweet to sour, but I think we're also quite interested in the chef's aspect, the creative, the culinary, the arts aspect of fermentation.
I think I'm sure in the world of fermentation is really, we can sit here and talk like all day about it. But I think for the purpose of our restaurant here at Mossels, what I really do here, we do a lot of salt curing, brining, and whey fermentation. There's also another thing that I kind of do here, which is burying it in a bit of medium. I'll talk a little bit later, but I think the most basic that we really do here is salting it and putting it into brine. Yeah, so those are two other. We do a little bit of whey fermentation here, but not much. Yeah.
Okay, that's. I think it's also quite a good introduction to, the microbes that are involved in fermentation. I think when we talk about fermentation, we don't always think about, who is responsible or what is responsible, right? So, people look at me as a fermenter, as a brewer, and they think like, it's a lot in the expertise of the brewer, but I see myself as like a shepherd or a curator. So I don't actually do the fermentation, right? And you would know that you don't actually do the fermentation.
Yeah.
What you do is to coax or to persuade or to create the right microbes to do the fermentation for you, right? So you don't actually have to do all the work, which is what I love about fermentation, that you don't have to do a lot of the work. You just have to create that nurturing, cultivating
and
environment.
I think what's interesting is the evolution of it, right? Because the evolution of it actually is very dependent on Mother Nature.
Yes.
I mean, the humidity today, you know, like the air, you know, how much bacteria is in the air, the free wild yeast, you know, a lot of things contribute to the end product. But I guess as fermenters, what you want to be very concerned about is like the produce you use, how clean it is, your receptacles, you know, like what you say, how you guide, you know, and coax this whole ferment to actually evolve and to end up as this end product. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, we spoke a bit about lacto-fermentation, but I know you are experienced in Koji and Miso. What's your approach to that to shio Koji to Misos?
Okay, so my relationship with shio Koji is like, I used to see this packet of thing in like media or whatever and in Japan, and I'm like, what's this? And then my Japanese friends tell me like, oh, is this like secret thing that makes everything tasty? I was like, oh, is it? Then like, I do visit our sake brewers a lot, and then that's where I started learning, oh, you know, you can actually make this product very easily, right? You just basically salt and you just need the Koji, that's it. And then and I realized that it adds as a great marinade to meats and a tenderizer. So then we started doing it like years ago, like maybe 7 years ago in the restaurant.
Wow.
Yeah, so we made our own. Yeah, and it's not very difficult to make.
No,
it's just, you know, you got clean water. Just make sure your water has no chlorine in there, right? So definitely use like distilled water, and you just need a good Koji culture.
Yep.
And basically you just salt.
Yeah. In my experience, I use tap water and that seems to work fine as well.
Well, maybe because you're in Singapore.
Yeah, maybe in Singapore.
Tap water is pretty, you know. Yeah.
But I think what's interesting and what people may like to find out more is the science of it, right? So you know when we add this kind of almost magical ingredients, it just doesn't work for us, right? And from my perspective, from my work as a scientist, when we add it, we also want to understand why. So we know. The science tells us that Koji produces enzymes that breaks down starch, proteins, fats, and when we break down proteins, we break down proteins into amino acids, which give us umami compounds like glutamate. Yes. When we break down fats, we get volatile aldehydes, we get alcohols, so that all brings aroma to it, and I think that sort of underscores my approach to it. And when we look at Koji, for example, at cell culture, we look at what the enzymes can do, because those are very powerful enzymes. And I think there's some examples where we use the enzymes to break down starch. So we will break down sugars in rice to unlock the sugars almost. We will use that to unlock sugars in surplus bread. If you have excess bread, it still has a lot of starch, a lot of energy, but until you can release those sugars, they are trapped. So we use Koji to activate those enzymes, activate those sugars, and then let the yeast eat the sugars to ferment. So that I think is sort of my perspective on Koji. You mentioned that you traveled to Japan to learn about Koji. You also mentioned earlier you traveled to Korea to learn about kimchi, and I think you had a very interesting anecdote.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everyone, talk to any Korean, they'll tell you like, my house kimchi is different from your house kimchi, right? Like everyone's grandmother makes like a different style. And for me, like why I headed to Korea was really to investigate and to understand why, right? I think quite similar to like making Koji and other ferments, the base ingredients are actually very simple, right? But of course, what makes it different and why it differs from household to household would be the aromatics that you add in it. Like you mentioned, you don't like the kimchi is so pungent, right? But some households that have been, wow, it's like garlic bomb in there, right? So it really depends on what you add in there, which is why it's interesting. And then I also understudied this master whose master used to, palace style, right? So very, very refined kimchi is something that I've never experienced before. But what was very interesting is, for normal kimchi, you basically chop up all your aromatics, your ginger, your garlic, your mince, your radish. But for them, what she taught me was to juice everything. So you have the same ingredients, but everything is juiced. and then you mix it and let it sit in the juice. So ginger juice, garlic juice, onion juice.
Okay.
So the end
Interesting.
result is actually a very clean tasting kimchi, which is very refined to me. It's not my 100% favorite, but on occasions when you have something that is, you want something so clean tasting, example, like when she fed me like this a noodle that is handmade, and then you just eat it with that particular kimchi, it works great, right? Because you can taste the very clean flavors. But being the Singaporean that I am, I mean, I like strong flavors. I grew up here, you know, we were punchy, we put sambal, we put chili on everything, right? So I do like punchy flavors. So the kimchi we do here in the restaurants are also very reflective, I think, of the person making it. We do have different styles, but in general, like what we do here, a little bit over fermented because I like the tanginess, and also I like to put in a lot of different aromatics as well. Yeah.
I think, you know, when I teach workshops, I get people asking me like, so what's the difference between kimchi, sauerkraut, and achar? What's your take on it? Is there a difference? Are they too different to even start comparing it?
Wow. Kimchi, sauerkraut.
So I mean, they all have the same underlying lactic acid fermentation, right?
Correct.
Lacto-fermentation.
I think it's the aromatics, no, that you put in there.
It's a combination of flavors, right?
Correct.
For sauerkraut, you're typically expecting caraway seeds, peppercorn, mustard seeds.
Correct. So
Kimchi,
when previous menu we did sauerkraut here. I like using red cabbage too, so I call it ruby kraut. But I do put in different spices besides your typical. I mean, as you know, we do fusion here, so I like to learn the traditional, and then I have my own interpretation to what it should taste like. Same thing like when I went to Korea, I learned how to make gochujang. I put in my own interpretation. They usually use like white glutinous rice, but I made ours with like pulut hitam rice.
Oh, okay.
Right, so
Okay,
it ends up as something that's more earthy. You know, you have a different flavor profile. Like I like learning traditional methods of doing ferments, and then be creative about it. You know, you can put in different spices. I mean, you can put in anything.
And I think that's also sort of the philosophy that I like to teach people as well. Like I would say, you know, don't get hung up on what is authentic.
Correct.
Don't get hung up on what is traditional. Like okay, like learn it by all means.
Correct.
But I think you fundamentally don't need to go out of your way to buy, you know, imported ingredients from so and so country.
Yeah, especially if it's not native.
It's not native here.
Singapore, I like to use stuff that's here.
And I think this also leads to another question that people like to ask: like, do you need to use, you know, fermentation chambers, fridges, incubators for this to be authentic? You know, so you can mimic the German weather, the Korean climate. What's your approach to this?
We don't use it here. Space constraint is one thing, but also I don't feel like we really need it. I mean, generally being in this hot weather, our ferments definitely ferment a lot quicker anyways. But I think the trick is not about getting a fermentation chamber, but to know where to stop your ferment so it doesn't get over fermented. So what we do here is we ferment it and then we harvest it, and then we keep it in like a 0 to 3 degrees temperature kind of fridge.
That keeps it
constant. And that keeps it alive for a little while, because if you leave it out, it's definitely going to be over fermented, right? So for us, for restaurant purposes, that's what we do here. But I don't have like a fermentation chamber per se. Yeah.
You mentioned you use a sous vide machine or water bath.
So I like that as well. So sous vide machine for certain stuff actually helps with consistency of taste. We can actually maintain the temperature. You know, it's very gentle, and I like to use that a lot. It also prevents like weird stuff, right? And then I mean you can if you use a sous vide machine and you can see like the gas building up, and you know when to like let the gas out, right? With a traditional jar, you need to burp it, but then you're like, oh, when do I have to burp it? If you forget, you don't know. But with that, the bag actually shows. So for us, we kind of like it here. Once again, for restaurant purposes. But also, I do like to pasteurize our ferments also when we harvest. Not everything, depends on how we are serving it. But in general, we pasteurize it if we want to keep it, you know, so it actually has better longevity.
Yep. And I think the one thing that we don't normally think about when we think of lacto-ferments, right? When we think of lacto-ferment, we always think about vegetables. But the other thing that you can also lacto-ferment is, you know, their meats, their fishes, and curiously, milk. So like yogurt is a famous lacto-ferment.
Yep.
And I think if you're using a water bath, it's perfect because
Yep.
if you're using yogurt cultures, they thrive at slightly warmer temperatures
Correct.
from 38 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees Celsius. So when I make yogurt and I make like 2 liters at a batch, it's 2 liters overnight, 40 degrees Celsius, and I have yogurt lasting the whole week after that.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it's if there's a one tool that you would get, I would say it's a water bath, right?
You think so?
Like a sous vide machine.
Yeah. I think it's useful in many ways. I mean, of
Versatile,
course, to
yeah.
cook meats and whatever, but then it's also great for this. And I think for yogurts especially, it's very consistent.
Yeah, and I
Right?
think you never want a one-use appliance. You want an appliance that is versatile that you can use for different preps. Right?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, so we talk about controlling the climate. How do you mentioned earlier that we need to select the right vegetable, the right produce. You need to clean it. What's your thoughts on the choice of produce?
I think I know other people who really like select very pretty vegetables and all that, but I kind of like to use the uglies. I think it's a great way of saving, stuff that maybe doesn't look so pretty on the shelf but still tastes good. So I do like using that a lot here in the restaurant. So I always ask the suppliers, if you have anything that's like on its way out, don't kill it, like send it to me. We can definitely put a better use to it, and that's why I really like fermenting as well.
Yeah, I go around talking to people. They always ask me like, how is this relevant to food sustainability? How is it relevant to reducing food waste? I think like you mentioned earlier that it's a great way of extending the shelf life of nutrition, right? So if you have cabbage that's about off season, you don't have to eat it immediately, then to throw it away. You can just ferment it, and that preserves it over weeks, over months. And I think this is, like you mentioned, you can use surplus ingredients to ferment. You can use ugly foods to ferment. Part of our work with restaurants is to also design fermentation recipes, fermentation menus for them to figure out how to use surplus ingredients or to use trimmings, right? Things that you wouldn't serve, you can just ferment, make it into a sauce.
Correct. So I think what we do with trimmings here, because I'm really into sustainability and like really reducing food waste. So all the trimmings either go into making a flavored vinegar, or they go into making a ferment, which ends up in the sauce, like what you mentioned. So it's a great way of still having that vegetable being used, but then the whole flavor and everything has changed, right, through fermentation. Yeah.
You mentioned a specific dish earlier using fermented celery. Like, how does that work? Tell us about it.
Okay, I think for the restaurant, a lot of people come in and like, I don't want to ferment, because it's whatever, maybe too sour. Maybe I think a lot of people have experienced maybe bad ferments.
Bad experience, yeah.
It's either too sour, maybe it smelled funky or something. So to them, it's like, I don't want it. So my way of doing it, I kind of weave it into the menu without people really knowing. Firstly, I like the nutritional benefits that it has. The next thing is the flavor that it adds to it. So for example, on our current menu, we have a tuna tartare, very simple thing. But what I put in there, the usual, maybe put in some chopped onions, and stuff like that. But for us here, I ferment celery. So that's a NukaZuke. We actually bury it in a bit of flavored miso. So it's miso, and then we blend in garlic and all that. It adds a great flavor. Even celery, most people might just like turn their heads away from celery. I don't want celery. But when you actually ferment it, it changes to this like crunchy, like tasty, almost like Thai po tasting, like, a little bit that when you throw it in there, instead of just salting, it actually adds that great like savoriness and saltiness to it. And that's really how I like to cook here also, like layering through flavors. And I think fermentation actually allows me to do so.
It's layering through flavors and layering through time almost, right?
Correct.
The interesting chemistry about cooking celery is that it generates compounds, these kinds of compounds that we know as kurkumi. So it's sort of like the cousin of umami, but it generates what we usually describe as a heartiness to it. So I thought it was quite clever that you're using celery in the dish.
And actually that goes on the snack. So we do a set menu here. So that actually is a start. So I think it's a great snack to start your meal with because it actually builds out your appetite.
Yeah, I think that's what's sometimes lovely about fermentation. You mentioned that people these days sometimes they have bad experiences with it, and it puts them away. from fermentation, and that's been my experience as well. Like when I serve dishes or beverages to people who, for example, may not normally like kombucha, right? Because of maybe they've had bad kombucha outside. But if you don't tell them it's kombucha, they drink it. They're like, oh, hey, they should like it. And then at the end, you reveal that, oh, actually, that was kombucha. And I think you can sort of change people's perspective on fermentation. You show them that it's actually a good way or I won't say a right way, but there's a better way of fermenting and to showcase fermentation.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think with that in mind, so how can a beginner start to ferment, right? What are, say, the top 2 easiest ingredients that someone can ferment with?
I think you will agree with me, cabbage, no?
Cabbage
is like...
Cabbage is versatile.
It's very versatile, and I think it's easy to deal with. And actually pretty much any root vegetables. I would stay away from stuff that has a bit higher water content, because then for beginners, maybe not. Because then you have to deal with the crunchiness and stuff like that, which you have to like pull out the salt first and things like that. Use salt to pull out the moisture. But I think for beginners, really easy to do, like just salt brine, vegetables, like carrots, turnips, daikons, really easy. Cabbage, sauerkraut is really easy.
Yep.
But I think just make sure it's weighted. Make sure there's no contact with air, and make sure to burp it often. Yeah, I think pretty much. Oh, but salt is very important. We chatted a little bit. I think for most books, generally they don't tell you what salt they're using.
Yep.
They just either give you like a grammage or a percentage. I mean, for over here, we do based on percentage. But I think what's important to know is how much sodium there is in your salt. So just make sure you look at the type of salt you're using. I mean, sea salt in general has like 40% sodium. Morton's has about 25. Diamond salt, which is what we use here, has about 12. So then do adjust your recipes, accordingly. If not, you might end up with like a really salty ferment, which is, most beginners might end up doing that.
It's not the worst, right? You can always like rinse it off or
Of course. You can just like soak in a bit of water and then it's good to go again, right? Yeah.
I think, in my experience, when I teach classes or workshops, the hardest ferment is the first ferment. I think it gets a lot easier from there once you sort of.
Because I think you think too much. You think too much when you do your first ferment. Like you're thinking, oh, what could go wrong? But just try it, right?
Yeah, I think thinking of the microbes doing the work takes away some of the agency from the human, and I think makes it easier. It makes you less responsible for.
Yeah, but it depends. If you're a control freak, then you'd be like, you need to control all these things, but that you cannot in a ferment.
I think you cannot, and there's some life lessons there as well.
Of course,
sometimes,
definitely, man.
Things happen like COVID. You just have to play the hand that you're dealt, right?
Definitely.
And I think the same is true for ferments, right? You work with the produce. You can, clean your produce the best you can. You can sanitize your equipment the best you can, but from that point on, it's all up to the microbes.
A lot can happen. You can like if you trace back and you figure like when you have a bad ferment, you trace back like I did everything right. So what happened?
Yep.
No, right?
And so I think the easiest ferments are cabbage. I personally like beverage fermentations. Drink ferments, I know you don't really do that here at the restaurant.
Yeah, we don't do that here.
But I think drink ferments are easy because I think primarily you want to find recipes that only require like 3 ingredients. Right. So in the case of cabbage, you're looking at cabbage, water, salt, 3 ingredients. For kombucha, you're looking at tea, sugar, starter culture.
But I think, with kombucha, what I'm particular also is I think to brew a good kombucha, the SCOBY is very important. Yeah. So that's finicky.
Challenge.
That's finicky, to get a good source of SCOBY. But other than that, it's pretty easy,
Yeah, and I think, when you look at sauerkraut, look at kimchi or kombucha even, they are fundamentally, I would say, quite robust. You can forget about them for a bit and they may not be prime, but they are okay, right? And I think as a first ferment or even as a second ferment, you want something that's easy to do. And then once you get into a rhythm, once you get more confident, it's a lot easier for you to control or to manage your ferments.
That's definitely like the first baby step. I mean to do root vegetables. And then I think something that's very practical that you can do at home that you would use is actually chili. Like we make a lot of different sauces here, chili sauces and all that. Of course, the easy way that of making a chili sauce, of course, it's just vinegar, chili,
Yep.
garlic, right? But if you can actually ferment your own chili at home, and you taste it after, you'll never want to go back to like a
It's crazy. It's
vinegar,
crazy.
garlic, and chili mix, you know. And it's actually very easy to make as well. Same thing, salt, water, chili.
I remember, I think my first fermented chili sauce, I took a leaf from, like you mentioned, Tabasco and other fermented chilies. It was just chili padi, red chilies, garlic, coriander stems. And the result was a chili that tasted like chicken rice chili, right? So the lacto-fermentation brought in a very natural acidity, very natural tang to it.
Correct.
With the garlic, it was crazy. You get chicken rice chili just from aging and fermenting chilies.
Yes.
And I thought that was a very clever way of using extra chilies, for example.
And in fact, like I think you can look around the house, right? Anything that is lying around that's about to go dead, you can basically like ferment it. That's what I do at home. Like, okay, my garlic has been sitting there for like years, you know, it's not being used. Then ferment it. It's so easy. And then, you know, it's great to use it for whatever, like the flavor that you get from it. Okay, confit garlic is a rage.
Yes.
But then, like, if you actually ferment garlic,
Black garlic's crazy as well.
it's great, yeah. And black garlic is so easy to do too. Okay, but that's a whole different thing.
It's a different thing altogether.
Yeah.
It's a different thing. I think that's also almost a good segue into. So we spoke about what beginners should try, right? What about people who are confident? You know, what's a good challenge for advanced fermenters?
In my own journey, so I started with all those, and then later on, when I was really investigating about Japanese types of ferments, I started doing something called NukaZuke. So NukaZuke actually is a rice bran ferment. It's very different. There's no water. Well, there's water, but you use rice bran. You can easily get it from Japanese supermarkets. Basically, you mix in salt and water to form like a bed. And then you bury your vegetables after salting it inside this bed. But the bed requires a bit of stirring daily. But the taste of a NukaZuke pickle is amazing. Like, I don't do it here in the restaurant because, I mean, we're closed, you know, for 1.5 days. You have to stir it every day. I'm not going to come back to stir it. But yeah, I mean, it's something that you can do at home, but it's finicky because you have to stir it every day. But other than that, I think I won't say it's advanced. I would say it's like mid-level.
I've found NukaZuke at home that I haven't been stirring. Should I be worried about it?
Oh dear. But what I like to do with NukaZuke, eggplants.
Ah.
Amazing flavor if you bury eggplants. Nuka bit.
I think mine, I happen to be growing kailan because, you know, everyone gets like kailan seeds. So I grew my own kailan and I popped it in the bed. So this is truly like homemade, homegrown kailan.
That's amazing.
So I'll have to go check on it in a bit.
I'm sure. Stir it.
I think I think NukaZuke has that challenge. I think what kind of challenge I like is I think miso. I think Koji ferments in general can be a slightly higher level. Miso fish sauce is great.
Yeah, I guess
if you get
because
it
you're
right.
adding one more factor in, right? Then you have like, how much Koji do I use? And of course, temperature. It's a lot of temperature because you need to steam it, make sure like, you know, it's not super hot. You need to cool it down. If not, the enzymes will die, right? So it's a bit iffier, I guess. Yeah. Than a usual salt produced water.
Yeah, if it's you know just 3 ingredients, is a 3 system.
Correct.
It's easier control.
So yeah, so I mean, of course, to start miso, the classic will be soybeans. But then here we like to experiment. So currently we have corn miso. It works great. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a great way of preserving sweet corn as well. Sweet corn season's pretty short. White corn. So yeah, you can actually do that at home as well.
Yeah, I think in general I sort of see it as, you know, the easy ferments are vegetable ferments.
Yeah.
And then when you start to ferment proteins, it starts to get a bit tricky, a bit funkier. Right. So if you're looking at, you know, miso, you're looking at like tempeh, more things can go wrong, more things can become funkier.
Yeah, because then of course mold is something that definitely would sometimes sneak in.
Yep. But when you're working with tempeh, when you're working with koji, you want more, right? But now it's about
the wrong mold. The right mold, the wrong mold. Yeah. So, one more thing I wanted to share also is I think a lot of people get scared when they see like this white cloudy thing
The yeast
floating.
growing.
Yeah, so the calm yeast actually is not bad. It's not a mold. You can easily just scoop it out. Sometimes it occurs, actually it occurs quite frequently if, say, temperature ranges like
Temperature
fluctuates
fluctuations,
too
yeah.
much, or there's oxygen in there, or sometimes not enough acid. But it's nothing bad. But I think in general, just make sure you smell and taste. I mean,
Yeah,
smell and taste.
yeah, and
for me.
that's what I tell people as well. Use your common sense,
Yeah.
right? So you want to, you first use your eyes. You visually assess it, right? Does it look right? Does it look like you have a mushroom forest growing in there, right? So those are telltale signs, right?
Yeah.
If it looks okay, you smell it. Does it smell right? Does it have that expected, lactic tang to it? Does it smell fresh?
Yeah.
Or does it smell like death? And right?
You can tell, man. You can tell.
I've had I think like 3-month-old tempeh and it smelled like something died in a jar. So that's quite crazy, right? So you smell, right? Your smell will tell you a lot. And finally, if you're there, like try a bit, like a small spoonful will sort of help you to
But you
clue
see
you
the thing
in.
with smell, right? So, I mean, fish sauce stinks. I mean, but it tastes good. So then, people are like, how do I know if it's gone bad? Like,
So you sort of have to. It's a bit of. I think there's a bit of culinary experience there as well, right?
Definitely.
So if you are familiar
what
with fish
it's
sauce,
supposed to taste like.
if you know how it's supposed to smell, it's supposed to smell pungent. And
Correct.
when you taste it, you sort of appreciate how it ferments, right? So we can also talk about what final tips or fun facts that you have. To you, what is the line between fermentation and rotten? What do you, if it's spoiled, if it's a failed ferment, what do you typically do with it?
Failed? I would just bury it as compost.
Toss it out, right? Yeah.
No, you can't save it. But sometimes, like I mentioned mold earlier, right? With the calm yeast is okay. Sometimes white mold is okay. You can just wipe it off. I mean, sometimes with miso, you do get a layer of white mold. You just don't want the black or the red.
Yeah.
Because that's when it will turn whatever's underneath off, definitely.
I think some recipes say just put some alcohol, 白酒, shoju, or
What do you mean? Like on
just use alcohol to clean out the mold. Like,
oh yeah. So we can wipe it with vinegar. You can wipe it with sake. But in general, for my misos, we generally put a parchment paper on top, like a baking paper, so it actually contacts wrap, so you don't get all this. It's a bit funky in Singapore because weather-wise, right? It's not like in Japan where it's taking a long time to ferment it. But yeah, so for here, you just have to make sure there's really no air contact, because that's when the mold would land. So for me, it works great. Like for us here, we just put a parchment paper on top, put weights on top, and then it's good.
All right. So while you're on the topic, the line between fermentation and rotten, what is that line to you?
Taste, smell.
Taste, smell.
Yeah. Rotten is when it has this ammonia. There's like this very ammonia taste to it. I mean, if you some people what's ammonia? If you have a really pungent cheese, maybe that is stinkier than the ipua, then maybe that's ammonia, because that's pushing really at the end of it already.
I think it's. I think in your travels you must have seen some really crazy ferments, some really funky ferments, but they may be funky to you, but to the locals, it's normal, right? And I think going on this journey of food and fermentation also helped to open my perspective on food, right? So to me, the lines can sometimes be quite arbitrary. To me, over fermented tempeh may be spoiled, but in other areas of the world, it's a delicacy, because people appreciate the funk. And when you fry it off, you actually lose a lot of that funkiness, and it just becomes a lot of umami, a lot of depth of flavor. So it can sometimes be quite arbitrary, and I think that is where there's a bit of creative and personal element, right? So it's up to the chef to draw that line and to decide what you want to eat, what you want to serve, and I think that is sort of the fun part about it, right? Because this is, after all, the interface between science and art.
Correct. So another thing, just now earlier we mentioned about pulling it when it's at its prime, where it's you can eat it like this, and when it's over fermented. So for example in Korea, when you do kimchi stew and all that, it's actually over fermented cabbage.
Oh, is it? Oh, wow, okay. I
Yeah,
didn't know
so
that.
they have so if your cabbage that you pulled it and then you didn't finish it, like don't throw it out. You know, it's just more sour,
Yep,
but then
yeah.
there's a good use for it. You know, you can put it into stews and all that, and it tastes great.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah, like what you said, you know, whoever's cooking can determine what they want to do with the ferment. Whether you just eat it like this, or whether you want to turn it into sauce, you know, or like, you know, blend it with something else, and it can still be used.
And that's probably a great takeaway for our viewers listening. With that, thank you for being with us. Have a pleasant evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.